Okay, so you're all very welcome to week 3 of the course of Sailing the Worldly Winds. Particularly well done to you for making it in on this bank holiday Monday. I was just saying in our team meeting beforehand that when the weather tends to be very good, the attendance tends to plummet. But it has been quite stormy today here, so that's probably helped people come here as well. So to give you a sense of what we'll do tonight, let me just share my screen. Here we go. So what we'll do tonight then is we will do a recap of last week, including the home practice. In other words, I'll remind you of what we looked at last week. I'm sure most of you were here last week, or you got to watch the video, but if not, or even if you were, we might need reminding. And we'll go into home practice groups then for about, I can't remember what we normally do, 10, 12, 15 minutes or so. And tonight then is focused more on meditation. So we're going to look in the first half at meditation and the 7 bojjhangas. That's a Buddhist word, but what it means is wings of enlightenment, you could say, or factors of enlightenment. And then we'll do some reflection and we'll have a break. And then after that, we'll do some more a proper meditation, a mindfulness of breathing meditation. We'll look at that a bit more. And then we'll do the home practice groups and then we'll finish. Yeah. So in a few moments, I'll remind us of what we did last week. But for now, why don't we just arrive, even though we've all had the weekend off, hopefully. Maybe not everyone, but hopefully we've had a bit of a weekend off. But it would be good to arrive and just to settle. So why don't we set ourselves up in meditation? Well, not even in meditation. Why don't you set yourself so you're sitting upright and reasonably comfortable? Okay, if you've just come in, you're very welcome, and we're just going to do a short 5-minute meditation just to arrive and connect with ourselves. So beginning by just taking in our surroundings, the sounds we can hear, the wind or the traffic outside, maybe the hum of our computer, the sound of our housemates, whatever we can hear. Closing your eyes if you're happy to do so and doing this. And then tuning more into ourselves seated here. Maybe noticing, first of all, the contact of our feet with the floor or the contact of our sitting bones. And maybe our lower back, if that's in touch with a chair as well. And really, it's an attitude of opening to what's already there. Being patient if you don't feel much. And bringing our attention to our legs and our feet. Noticing, imagining at least the shape of our legs. Seeing what we can feel in the legs, the knees, the feet. Becoming aware of our backs and our shoulders. Our throat and neck and jaw. Checking our jaw isn't clenched, our throat is at ease, back of the neck is comfortable, or as comfortable as we can be. Becoming aware of the face, making sure we're not holding anything tightly in our face, frowning. The eyes are relaxed, the eyelids are relaxed, the lips, the tongue. The scalp. Becoming aware then of the arms, the upper arms, the elbows, the forearms, the wrists, and the hands and fingers and thumbs. What sensations can we feel in the hands and fingers and thumbs? And then becoming aware of our stomach and abdomen area. You can take a deeper breath or two down into your belly if that helps. Letting go of any holding as best you can, any shape. Becoming aware of any tightness or tension or discomfort. And then resting in the heart area, the chest, the lungs, the rib cage. Perhaps noticing the rise and fall of the rib cage as we breathe in, as we breathe out. For the last few moments then, just being with the body breathing. The body breathing in, the body breathing out. And with each out breath, letting go that little bit more into the support of the cushions or the chair, whatever we're sitting on. And with each in breath, feeling like we're inhaling energy and energizing the body. And then starting to broaden out your awareness once more. Taking in the room around you, your surroundings. Actively listening to sounds to bring yourself out. When you're ready, then bring in the practice to a close, wiggling fingers and toes. And then in your own time, opening your eyes. Okay, so to welcome if you just came during that session there. So if you were here last week, to remind you of what we did last week, rather, I'm just going to go over what we did last week again. So let me just check out. Yeah. So first, we looked at working more deeply with the worldly winds. So going deeper with them, engaging with them more fully. So the first one was to recognize the worldly winds. That's kind of what we've been doing since week one. Week two, the second one was to distinguish control from influence. So, often you can't do anything about the fact that it's a wet and that it was at least, very wet today in places, and very windy, but you can influence how you feel about that, or you can influence the kind of day you have by the choices you make, for example, or you can control how someone else will respond to you, but you can, have an influence in terms of being as kind and as friendly as you can be to them. The third one then is to see the worldly winds as opportunities, particularly the opportunities for the Dharma doors, which we'll come back to in a moment. And then lastly, listen to the stories that we tell ourselves. So within every action is a story, is a view about why we need to do this thing. So watch out for those stories. They can be helpful and very unhelpful. And the Buddha talked a lot about working with our views, working with our stories in order to become more free. Yeah, because stories limit us often. So then in terms of the Dharma doors, so we had gain and loss, and the way out of those, the way to transcend those is generosity. We had fame and infamy, and the way to transcend and unify both of those is individuality, so becoming more of an individual. The first one, by the way, gain and loss and generosity, it really sums up by thinking more in terms of what you can give rather than what you can get or what you might lose. And then individuality is being yourself, staying true to your own values in all the situations that you find yourself in, rather than being blown around by fame and infamy. In terms of praise and blame, truthfulness is the one. So this is, accepting what is true in both praise and blame, and not taking them personally, or not letting it get emotionally messy, or not using praise and blame to get what we want or to hurt people and so on. So truthfulness is the way in, and also if we're on the receiving end of praise and blame, that's true as well. And then pleasure and pain, the gateway is mindfulness. So being mindful of what our experience actually is. So if there is pleasure, be mindful of that, and that can be enhance the pleasure. And if it's painful, but in an open kind of non-clingy way, and if it's painful, mindfulness helps us not do the second arrow, the secondary suffering that we layer on top of pain all too often. I didn't say this last week, but one of the sayings I've heard, it's kind of a paraphrase of the Buddha. I'm not sure if it is the Buddha really, but the paraphrase is that pain is a given, suffering is optional. Pain is a given, suffering is optional. It's a given that we will experience pain in life, but it's up to you whether you want to layer on secondary suffering on top of that. Yeah. So that was the Dharma doors, and then the home practice was to read chapter 2, and then just the 4 things: recognize the worldly winds, distinguish control from influence, see them as opportunities to go through the Dharma doors, listen to the stories we tell ourselves, and if you hadn't already, to join Slack and let us know how you're doing. Yeah. So that's the home practice. So what we'll do in a moment then is, let me just do one little thing. Sorry. I'm just going to put
Vajrashura, you just muted yourself.
I'm just going to put those in the chat now. Okay, so they're in the chat there for your groups. So Stephen, are you ready with the groups?
Yeah, just how long do you want?
Let's go for 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay.
Great. So a chance to chat about it in the groups. Okay, great. So I hope the groups were good, and great, thanks, Kat. That's a nice comment. I hope the groups are good. If you have any questions or comments about the material, do put them in the chat, or if you want to put them in the Slack as well, you can do that during the week. But I'm sure I've already communicated this, but I just think the Dharma doorways are such a useful teaching, so do keep them in mind. So this week I wanted to talk a bit about breaking habits more deeply, and the main way of breaking the habits more deeply will be meditation. So there's going to be a bit more content in this half and then a bit of meditation in the second half, yeah? So we've had lots of useful tips now. We've talked a lot already about doing the breaking the world, or seeing through the worldly winds, I guess you could say, and breaking through our habits. But the problem is, even though we know what to do, I'm sure you all know by now what to do, it's still very hard to do it. It's still very hard to do it. And I want to just share a quote which I think summarizes this very well, which is from Sangharakshita, the man who's the founder of our Buddhist community. So he says, the central problem of the spiritual life for most people is to find emotional equivalence for our intellectual understandings. So the central problem of the spiritual life for most people is to find emotional equivalence for our intellectual understandings. Okay, and I think this saying for me is really encapsulates so much of practice. I think the fish basket story last week, if you remember that, encapsulates so much of Buddhism, or was it the week before? I think it was last week. So basically, we kind of know what to do. We have these intellectual understandings, and what we need to do then is bring those down into our hearts, to find emotional equivalence for those. So we know, for example, that it's better to be mindful than to be caught up in the cycle of pleasure and pain. We know by now, I'm sure, that it's better to live in terms of generosity rather than in terms of gain and loss. So we know that that's an intellectual understanding, and yet we still get caught up in pain and pleasure and pain. We still get caught up in gain and loss at an emotional level. So we need to bring those kind of more intellectual understandings down into how we behave. And emotions are what propel us. Emotions are, there isn't quite an exact word for emotion in Buddhism, but you could say our propensities, our habits, our tendencies drive us in that way. Yeah. So meditation then is a way of doing this. Yeah. It's a way of, the thing that you find when you start looking at your stories, for example, is that our stories are very strong. We're so invested in our story about how we need this thing. We know that it won't make us happy, but we still, fall into the hole of we need this thing. Yeah. And I'm sure, we talked about this in our group a little bit, and I'm sure many of you have had that experience. And so looking at the previous 2 weeks' material, it was the outer work of recognizing the worldly winds, trying to have the Dharma doorways in the world, and so on and so on. And this week's material is more about the inner work. So last 2 weeks, the outer work, you could say. I mean, it's very rough. Don't take these too literally, but meditation is more the inner work, where we cultivate what is skillful internally. We accentuate the positive, and we experience the richness and the contentment that arises in meditation. And that helps us to rise above the worldly winds. Yeah. So to do this, we're going to look at a traditional list in Buddhism, which are called the 7 Bojjhangas, the 7 stages of enlightenment. I think Bojjhangas actually translates as wings of enlightenment. So the 7 wings that help you fly to enlightenment, if you like that image. But the 7 stages of enlightenment. And these are, again, in the book. So this is from chapter 3 in Vajragupta's book, yeah? So let me just share again the screen. So I'll just mention all of these worldly winds now, and I'll mention them again when we come to them. I'll speak briefly about each of them. So the 7 stages of enlightenment. Firstly, we start with mindfulness. Then we have investigating and sorting out mental states. So that's a bit more of a mouthful than it is. I mean, it's a lot of work, obviously, but hopefully we'll be able to see that it's a bit more simple. But investigation of our mental states, sorting out our mental states. We have energy. We have joy. And then there's calming. And after calming comes concentration, although it's not quite, it's sometimes a sequence, it's sometimes not, but deep concentration. And then finally, we have equanimity. So traditionally, these take us all the way to enlightenment, but I think looking at meditation and from the point of view of each of these is quite good. And there's a lot of content in the chapter this week about these, and I'll just try and touch into them briefly and kind of evoke something of the flavor of them in meditation. I think that's really what I want to do. I want to evoke some of the flavor of each of these in meditation. And each of these as well kind of lead to a greater sense of freedom from the worldly winds, yeah? They all have within them the seeds of leaving behind the worldly winds. Okay, so the first one is mindfulness. Maybe actually give me a second and I'll sorry, I know some people are taking notes, so it might be nice for you to have them in the chat. I'll just put them in the chat there, if that's useful. So the first one is mindfulness, and all of practice starts with mindfulness in Buddhism. Yeah, mindfulness simply means being aware. I've talked about this a bit before, haven't I? You're more open to your experience, and with practice, your mind becomes a bit more clear. Sorry now for the clicking. A bit less scattered, a bit less confused. When we're mindful, we tend to be more aware of what's going on around us and more aware of what's going inside for us. We tend to be more aware of our inner world, the world of our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings. We also tend to develop our sensitivities for things, like our sensitivity for beauty, our sensitivity to color, our sensitivity to sound, in a positive sense, our sensitivity to art, our sensitivity to other people and their emotions. So mindfulness isn't just about being aware of what's here now. It's about being aware of all the richness of texture in the world all around us, as well as internally. And it's usually very enjoyable. So when we're mindful, we tend to be happier. I'll come back to that in a moment, later on with concentration. And to be mindful is to be human. It's to be alive. It's to inhabit your experience. I might have said this on the week one, I can't quite remember, but when I first learned to meditate, I learned when I was in Trinity College, and I was in week 5 it was my 5th year of being in college. And I remember meditating, doing the mindfulness of breathing, which we'll do after the break, and walking through that campus and seeing all the trees and thinking, oh my God, look at those trees, they're so beautiful. And it was as if I was seeing them for the first time. Yeah, even though I'd been walking by them literally almost every college day, every day of term I'd walk by them and hardly notice them. So I think that for me encapsulates what mindfulness is. It's been really open to and taking in and inhabiting the world that we're in and our internal world as well. So how do we develop mindfulness? So we train ourselves basically to be aware. And we train ourselves to be aware through practices like the body scan that we did earlier. That's about being aware of your body, which is very important. And also through practices such as the mindfulness of breathing, which we'll do after the break. And, it's a very central practice in Buddhism to sit and be aware of the breath. And by noticing the breath, by noticing the body breathing, and by noticing when you've wandered off and coming back again to the breath, you set up a habit of mindfulness. And I can't really explain it, but when you practice mindfulness of something like the breath and the body, it tends to mean you're more mindful throughout your day as well. I mean, it's a habit you're setting up, but it's not entirely explainable. So I'll leave that to you to explore that. But noticing the body, its sensations, its weight, its posture, its energy, its aliveness, and awareness of the body tends to cut through a lot of this prapancha that we talked about last week, this mental proliferation. And the body is the seat of enlightenment, it's said, in some Buddhist texts. When you're in your body, you experience all your emotions more vividly. You can feel your positive emotions, your negative emotions. And it's a lot of the time with our emotional world, the mindful challenge is to be aware of what's actually happening, and the body can help us feel that, yeah, and the body can help contain that. And usually when we're aware of the body, our more painful emotions like anxiety tend to lessen. When you relax, you notice your shoulders are tense, and then you realize from being aware of that, oh, I'm a bit anxious about this thing coming up. And then you relax your shoulders as best you can, by being aware. You usually dissolve tightness in awareness. And then your anxiety eases as well. Or maybe you stop replaying that conversation that's going round and round in your head from earlier by being really in your body, In the same way that going for a walk or for a run can really help you relax as well emotionally. So mindfulness is the foundation of all Buddhist practice, yeah? I'll say a bit more about that in the second half. So that's the first one. The second one then is investigation, and obviously all meditation starts with mindfulness as well. Even the metta bhavana, the loving kindness practice, is based upon awareness. So the second one then is investigating and sorting out mental states. So this is Dhammavicaya is the traditional word. So it literally translates as something like investigation of mental events. So you're investigating your mental states. So in Buddhism doesn't really draw a hard and fast line like you get in the West between the head and the heart. Although I did just give that saying there about emotional equivalence to our intellectual understandings. But our thoughts are usually very strongly connected with our emotions. Yeah. As in, you get irritated with someone, and so you start thinking about how you're right in that situation and how they're wrong, So our thoughts and emotions are very linked. So when we talk about a mental state in Buddhism, we mean our states of heart and mind, yeah? And what we're trying to do with investigation here, investigating and sorting out mental states, is to really just, in a way, it's a further aspect of mindfulness. It's trying to see what is going on, internally in our heart and mind. Are the thoughts we're having, are the emotions we're having, skillful or unskillful, as we say in Buddhism, helpful or unhelpful, positive or negative, yeah? And something is helpful if it's based upon positive states of mind like generosity, kindness, awareness, wisdom. And something is unhelpful if it's based upon greed, hatred, delusion, and so on. And body awareness is really useful here to help us slow down. Our mind is often like a wheel that's spinning. And when you're in your body, it tends to give it a bit more weight, and it tends to slow down how fast the wheel is turning. So, bodily awareness is very important, but we need to really develop this faculty of awareness, just being really open to what's to our body, first of all. And then it's almost like there's a hierarchy. That the way I do it anyway, there's a hierarchy. I start to tune into my body, then I start to tune into, well, first of all, I tune into what's around me, actually, then my body. Then I tune into how it feels to be in this body. Is it comfortable? Is it uncomfortable? Those of you who know a bit more Buddhism, you could say about Vedana, but don't worry about that if you haven't heard that. So how it feels to be in this body. Then I tune into my ongoing emotional experience, which is always going on. And often I tune into my heart, in particular, my guts and my throat. And that's where my emotions are often mostly playing out. And just try and be open to them as they are without changing them. And then tune into my thoughts as well, which are usually related to my emotions. And so investigation means just, well, what am I actually doing right now internally? What am I feeling? What am I doing emotionally? So emotions are always things that you're doing. They're motion, there's something that you're doing. And you're sitting with them then. And sitting with, when you're opening up to negative emotions, when you investigate them, they tend to pass through you more quickly. They tend to dissolve more quickly in awareness. Yeah. You can try that out for yourself, but that's just the truth of the nature of your mind generally. As long as you're not pouring more fuel on the fire, once you step up, or to mix a different metaphor, they're like wheels. Emotions are like wheels turning. And when you step off the wheel might stay turning for a while, but they'll slow down relatively quickly, actually. So when you investigate and explore and feel negative emotions, they'll tend to dissolve. And when you investigate and explore and feel positive emotions, they actually tend to enhance them. They tend to deepen them into something even more enjoyable. So that's quite something about the nature of the mind, that when you really openly, without clinging or without pushing away, when you investigate negative states of mind, it tends to dissolve them. And when you investigate positive states of mind without clinging onto them or trying to squeeze pleasure out of them, they will tend to deepen into something even more. Yeah. Yeah, and you might need to at times just say no to negative states of mind. You just say, no, I'm not going to dwell on that conversation from earlier. I'm just going to try and do something else. And you just have to keep doing it. And inch by inch, you make progress. Yeah. Okay. So that's investigation of mental states. So the next one then is, as you do this, as you become more mindful, as you investigate and get into the habit, a lot of it is getting into the habit of noticing what's going on internally, you tend to free up your energy more. So the third one is energy. Yeah. Less and less of your emotion, less and less of your energy, less and less of your emotional energy is bound up in keeping down bad memories, unskillfulness, you could say, negative emotions, and a lot of stuff just tends to get released, and you tend to unlock the deeper energies of your mind, particularly in meditation. And your mind will feel more subtle and supple. You'll be more able to respond to things in a creative way, and your body will feel more relaxed as well. And you'll feel like you've just a bit more. I think energy is kind of synonymous with spaciousness, actually, personally. More synonymous. It's quite synonymous with a feeling of openness, clarity, a feeling like you could flow in whatever direction you need to. And a lot of meditation is about converting or transforming negative energy to positive energy. Yeah, negative emotions to positive emotions and so on, or deepening the positive emotions you have. Really, if you're a meditator, you're an alchemist. Yeah, you're an alchemist trying to converting your mind to gold. That's what you're doing. So the alchemists used to convert what they called a base metal, or usually lead, into gold. Now, I don't know if they ever managed to do it, but metaphorically speaking, we're converting the more muddy parts of our mind into energy, into freedom, into spaciousness, into joy, and so on, into all the things we have here. Yeah. And in fact, some schools of Buddhism, the Tantra in Buddhism, talk about how all life is really just a manifestation of energy, and we need to free up and transform our energy. And in meditation, seeing if you haven't done much meditation, this might be premature. But if you've been meditating for a while, one of the things I'd recommend is to see your body more in terms of energy flow rather than muscle and bone, and organ. So see it in terms of energy flow, and think of meditation as just notice energetic tightnesses in your body and work at loosening those as you do the mindfulness of breathing or whatever. Okay, and energy can be very, very subtle as well. I've never failed to find delight in just how subtle energy can be, particularly when I'm on retreat and doing lots of meditation. So when we're freed up then from energy, when we have all this energy, we'll tend to be happier, we'll tend to be more joyful. And this is the next stage then, joy. Yeah. So William Blake, to quote him again, he says, energy is eternal delight. Energy is eternal delight. So there's something about the nature of energy that is just delightful. That's just very freeing. So, I mean, you might not always experience this in meditation. I don't experience this always in meditation. And you might at times be working with really painful states of mind, But when you can experience that freeing up of energy, it's very enjoyable. Yeah. And ideally, meditation is enjoyable. And you can't guarantee that it will be. But when energy is flowing, it is very enjoyable and natural and pleasurable. Yeah. And just to highlight that Buddhism is really clear that it doesn't have any problems with joy and delight and energy. Yeah. It just points out that a lot of what we think is enjoyable actually isn't, So we often think that getting things is enjoyable in and of itself, but it depends on how you relate to that. If you're neurotic about that, getting things is actually probably a bit painful, actually. Yeah. Or getting intoxicated, I think, is enjoyable. When you start to meditate, you realize intoxication is actually quite an unpleasant state of mind. So Buddhism really encourages wholesome joy and wholesome delight. And meditation is one of the most wholesome pleasures you can get. And you can, in meditation, just really be open to joy in your body. Yeah. And this might be something more obvious to people or more relevant to people who've been meditating for a while. I know some of you might not have ever meditated, and that's fine. We'll do it in a while. But you might want to just start paying attention as you do the mindfulness of breathing. Well, is there joy in my body that I can bring my attention to as well as the breath? Yeah. You might even drop in the word joy or pleasure or something like that and see if that has an effect. Yeah. And allowing it to be there, just allowing yourself to feel it as you're also being aware of the breath, or as you're also being aware of the loving kindness, if you're doing the loving kindness practice. And it's important to do all this without any kind of control or forcing. If you try and force yourself into pleasure, you'll end up in pain. I'm afraid you'll end up in that worldly wind cycle again of pleasure and pain. I had a friend whose name was Joe, and he started getting deeper in meditation, and he started accessing deeper states of mind, which are called jhana. So that's a word for deep absorption that's very pleasurable. And he spent the next 2 or 3 years trying to get back into that state of mind. And because he was so driven to get back into that state of mind, he had a slightly compulsive personality by his own admission. He wrecked any chances of getting back into that state of mind, into that pleasure. And in fact, we used to tease him. We used to call him Jhana Joe. And it was in good natured, obviously. We weren't being cruel or anything. And he was kind of I still tell these stories about him. He's a very good object lesson for not getting too driven in meditation to experience pleasure, but do try and be open to pleasure if you can. But also just to flag that pleasure is not the aim in meditation. The aim of meditation is transformation, yeah? And sometimes that'll be pleasant and sometimes it'll be painful. If it's painful all the time, then you probably should chat to someone who's a bit more experienced, like drop me a line or something like that. Meditation shouldn't be painful all the time. But a lot of the time for people, I think meditation is just a bit vague. And actually, if it was more enjoyable, if you could find more pleasure in meditation, your meditation would go a lot better, yeah? Okay, so 4 more, but I'll say less about these. So energy and joy are all very good, but then sometimes they can be a bit excitable. So we need to work on calming our energies at times in meditation. And sometimes we think of calm as being neutered or something like that. But calmness is actually a very positive and radiant quality in Buddhism. And it may not be on the surface of things the most exciting, but it's in meditation, it's like the difference between a mountain stream can be very bubbly, very all over the place, very sparkling, very noisy, and so on. But then if you look at a river as is about to enter the sea, it's usually quite calm, quite flat surface if it's not windy or so on, or if it's a deep river. And often the deeper rivers are less exciting, but much deeper. And in meditation, it can feel like calming is something like not, maybe not very interesting, but it's actually a radiant and very enjoyable one. And the image that Sangharakshita gives, it's a lovely image, is to think of a bumblebee in your garden at your flowers. So there's a lot of bumblebees coming out at the moment. So if you're sitting in your garden on a nice day and you can hear the bumblebees, so you hear this bzzz, and then it stops when it finds the nectar, and it just drinks the nectar for a while, and it's enjoying the nectar, and it's no longer buzzing around the place. So moving from energy and joy into calm is a bit like that, he says. So our minds can stop buzzing. Anyways, if you're not experiencing much joy or energy in your meditation, well, keep working, and it will happen from time to time. And then we move into concentration. So concentration or absorption. This is where you're fully absorbed in the breath or in whatever you're meditating upon. And again, to quote Sangharakshita, he says, the concentrated mind is a happy mind. The happy mind is a concentrated mind. So when you're concentrated, when you're absorbed in something, and by concentration, I don't mean kind of, I'm doing, my nephew is doing the Leaving Cert at the moment, and I'm helping him out with some grinds. I used to do maths, and it's not that kind of furrowed brow trying to work out a maths problem. That's not what I mean by concentration here. I mean kind of absorption, where you're just fully in something. So when we tend to be concentrated in that way, when we tend to be absorbed in that way, we tend to be happy. Yeah. And when we're happy, it's generally because we're absorbed in something. Yeah. It might be a conversation, it might be a person, it might be cooking, it might be going for a walk. And what I'd really encourage you to do is to see what you naturally get focused on. So I have friends who say they never get concentrated in meditation, but yet they're artists, and when they paint or when they do things, they can really be absorbed in what they're doing, you know? So we all have a faculty. I think we're all probably able to get absorbed in things. So find something that you can do, and do one thing at a time. You know, so maybe this week try, in terms of concentration or absorption, try and eat your food without watching a video on Netflix at the same time. You know, or reading a book or listening to a podcast. Just try and do one thing, and find things that you get absorbed in off the cushion, and that will help build up this meditative awareness that I'm talking about. It might be going for walks, it might be listening to good music, it might be sitting looking at the rain on the windows, it might be cooking, it might be painting, it might be watching the trees sway in the wind out there at the moment. It's not that windy now. Anyway, so that's concentration, yeah. And then the final one, and I'll stop after this because it's a lot of content, is equanimity. So the word literally means that if you go back, apparently the Latin from the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, says that it literally means fairness or equalness of mind. So you could imagine, like, when you think of the worldly winds, you're blown this way, then that way. Equanimity is the opposite of this. It's where you're able to stay centered and be equal of mind, whether you gain or whether you lose, whether you have pleasure or whether you have pain, whether you have fame or whether you have infamy, whether you have praise or whether you have blame. So no matter what is blowing, you're like a rock. You're equanimous. You're not blown around by it. I don't mean you're a rock and that you're cold and unfeeling. You know what I mean? You have to be, every image has its limitations, but you're no longer blown around. There's a deeper perspective at work. Yeah. And it's not so much indifference. Indifference is a kind of a subtle, we call it a near enemy of equanimity. It kind of looks like equanimity, but it's not. Indifference is where you're just not engaging. So equanimity means that when you're equanimous, if someone is in front of you who needs reassuring or needs compassion or love, you will give them love. You know what I mean? And then you'll return again to to your center. And if someone is doing really well in front of you, you will give them rejoicing. You know what I mean? You'll feel happy for them, and but you'll be able to keep in your center once you stop doing that. So it's all about coming back to a centeredness. And you don't get lost in any stories. So that's what equanimity is. It's described in meditative terms as a kind of a radiant centeredness that is completely untouchable by the world. Yeah. Anyways, maybe we'll get tastes of that in our meditation, but even if not, I'm sure we can get a sense of that. Okay, so that's the 7 bojjhangas. That's the 7 factors of enlightenment. And they kind of all evoke this quality of meditation. They all kind of evoke this quality of a meditative mind that isn't blown around as much by the worldly winds, or at least they're a path to not being blown around by the worldly winds. Yeah. Okay, so I think what I'll do now is, I was going to do a short reflection, but I think it might be better if we took a tea break and spent a bit longer on the meditation. Before we do the tea break, just to remind you that, again, as always, I think many of you have given money to the Centre for the course, and thank you for that. You're very generous. Just to remind you again that the course is being done on a donation basis. So, we're pretty much entirely dependent upon donations, apart from a government scheme. If we don't get donations from people, that's it. We won't be communicating the Dharma. But I think the centre has been staying afloat, and we've been doing okay. But that's due to the continued generosity of you guys. So if you can give a donation, that would be great. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment once I can type my loud keyboard without deafening you. What we'll do then is we'll go for a tea break. So why don't we be ready to go back at, let's say, 13 minutes past 8. So do what you need to do, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about meditation, then we'll do some meditation. And if you have any questions about any of the content in the first half, you can stick it in the chat as well. Okay, see you in 10 minutes. Okay, so no questions. So I hope everyone is completely clear on everything in the first half. So what we'll do now is I want to introduce and talk a bit about a meditation practice. So if you've done the mindfulness of breathing before, you'll know much of this already, I'm afraid. So I'm going to talk for about 5-10 minutes, and then we'll do a period of it for about 20 minutes or so, 20-25 minutes. And then we'll do the breakout, the home practice in the breakout rooms. If you have heard this before, well, it's good to hear it again. Yeah. So as I said earlier, mindfulness is the start of Buddhist practice, really. And it's certainly the start of meditation practice. And one of the things we need to do is learn how to develop mindfulness, learn how to be more mindful. Yeah. And one of the main ways we do this in Buddhist practice is through this practice called the mindfulness of breathing. And what you're doing is you're being simply aware of the breath. You're being mindful of the breath. Yeah. And as I said earlier, as I intimated earlier, it's very hard to. I can't quite explain why it works in some ways, but what you're doing is you're mindful, and then you notice when you're mindful of the breath. You bring your attention to the breath. Loads of Buddhist practices have the breath as a focus, and then you try and stay with that. And when your mind wanders off, your mind wanders off, yeah. And when you notice that you've wandered off, you go, my mind has wandered off, and you bring it back again to the breath, and you focus it again on the breath. Yeah. In a way, it's as simple as that. Now, there's probably a lot more nuance to it as well that could be discussed, but that's really what you're doing. And you do that without giving yourself a hard time about being distracted, about being a bad meditator, without giving yourself a hard time about how, usually what we do is we get annoyed with ourselves. We're getting distracted, or often what we do. And there's no place for that in this. There's no reason to be unkind to yourself in Buddhism or in meditation. So if you notice that you've wandered off, then that's great. You've moved from unawareness back to awareness. Yeah, you've moved from lack of mindfulness back to mindfulness. And in the course of, say, a 20-minute sit, you might get distracted 40 times. Yeah. And that's fine if it does. Obviously, the more you meditate, the less distracted you get. It is important to say that. And at the same time, when you wander off, when you notice you've been unmindful, you congratulate yourself, because you're reinforcing the habit of moving from unawareness back to awareness. Yeah. So that's what you're trying to do, really. You're setting up this habit of moving from unawareness back to awareness. And that's one aspect of it. I mean, the other aspect of it is that being aware of the breath is very enjoyable, or can be very enjoyable. It can be quite refined, being aware of the breath. It can bring you really into yourself, being aware of the breath. So really, that's all I want to say about preamble. I think the best thing to do is to do it. But there's also a few stages. So I just wanted to briefly share these stages. So it's usually done over 20-25 minutes at first, and there's 4 stages. So the first stage is, in all the stages, we're mindful of the breath, yeah? Now, to help us do that, we add a count. So we're mindful of the breath, and we have a count after the out breath. So we breathe in, we breathe out, count 1, internally and quietly. Breathe in, breathe out 2, breathe in, breathe out 3, breathe in, breathe out 4. And that's just a quiet count in our head. The main focus is on the breath, yeah? The breath in the body breathing. And when you reach 10, you start again at 1. So breathe in, breathe out 9, breathe in, breathe out 10, breathe in, breathe out 1, breathe in, breathe out 2. Yeah. And there's more that could be said there, but for the sake of brevity, I'll leave it at that. The second stage is a little bit different, subtly different. Might not seem very different, but we're mindful of the breath with a count before the in-breath. So it's 1, breathe in, breathe out. 2, breathe in, breathe out. 3, breathe in, breathe out. And so on. And when you reach 10, you start again at 1. Yeah. And the breath, the count is there as a support for you to be with the breath. The main focus is on the breath. And it's important to say that throughout this practice, we're trying to let the breath be at its own pace, particularly the breath in the body, but you're not trying to control the breath. If you try and control the breath in this practice, you'll just give yourself a headache. Yeah, don't do it. You're just trying to be with the breath. If you find that you are subtly controlling the breath, just try and relax with each out breath. Just try and let go of control. Breathe in, breathe out, let go of control. Yeah, and even if you have to do that for 20 minutes, that will have a big effect on you. Because if you're controlling the breath in meditation, you're probably trying to control other aspects of your life outside of meditation. And when you try and control things, you fall deeply into the worldly winds. Yeah. So then the third stage is being mindful of the breath. That's it. You just be mindful of the breath. Yeah. And the breath in the body, as I said. And then the fourth stage, and this is a bit more text than you need probably, but what you do is you start to become aware of where you first feel the breath enter the body. Yeah. So as you breathe in and out, you're mindful of the sensations at the point where you can first feel the breath enter the body. And I'm touching my nose because that's usually where I feel it. If you're breathing through your lips, it might be through your mouth, it might be your lips, it might be your upper lip. If you're breathing through your nose, it might be in the bridge of your nose, it might be in your throat. Wherever it is. And again, there's no set way that you have to breathe except let it be natural, in terms of your nose or your mouth or whatever. But at the point where you first feel the breath enter the body, you're aware of the sensations at that point as you breathe in and out. Yeah. So there are the 4 stages, and I'll lead us through the meditation so you don't have to remember those. It's not mindfulness of counting, it's mindfulness of breathing. The count is just there to help. It's not pranayama, if you know yoga. It's not controlling the breath. You're letting the breath be at its own pace. And you're congratulating yourself every time you wander off because you've just moved from unawareness to awareness. And you're setting up the habit of moving from unawareness back to awareness, or the habit of staying with something in awareness, staying with the breath. Yeah. So, I don't know if there's any questions about that, but let's get set up then. So normally in the center, I'd show you how to sit comfortably in meditation. What I'd suggest is that you just sit upright, reasonably upright in a reasonably firm chair. If you're sitting in a chair, move your sitting bones, move your bottom, basically. That's a polite way of saying your bottom, all the way back as far as you can. So your lower back is against the back of the chair. Don't sit slouched, yeah? And it's best if you can, don't do this now, but you can do this next time, is to slightly tilt the chair up from the back. You could put something under a book or something, or a briquette or something underneath the back legs, so it's subtly tilted, so it tilts your pelvis so you're more upright. You're trying to keep an openness across the front of your chest. And if you're on a couch, if you can't avoid it, you could just try and put some cushions behind your lower back so that you don't slouch into it. That can be good on a couch, but just do your best anyway. And if you need to move really slowly, yeah? I'll just give us a moment or two to settle into our posture to make sure we're reasonably upright. Now you want upright, but you also want relaxed, yeah? You also want relaxed. So just give us a moment or two and then I'll lead us into the meditation, and I'll lead the meditation. Okay, so settling into sitting here. Closing your eyes when you're ready. And just taking in the sounds we can hear around us. The sounds from outside the room, the sounds from within the room. Letting them be there like the background, like the wallpaper in the room. And now tuning into the body a bit more. Again, just like earlier, just seeing if we can open to our physical experience, opening to what we're feeling in the body, turning towards that bodily experience. Particularly being aware of the points of contact with the floor, the chair, the cushions. Bringing your awareness down from your head into your torso, into your hands if you need to, as best you can. And are we at ease now? How comfortable or uncomfortable are we? How at ease or ill at ease are we? Just being open to that without pushing anything away or pulling anything towards you. And again, so much of it is just opening to rather than grabbing. And starting now to be aware of the body breathing, the breath in the body. So your body is already breathing. So just being aware of that, being aware of the movements of the diaphragm, the movements of the stomach, the chest as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Not controlling it or not working with an idea of the breath, with the actual breath in the body. And our intention in this practice is to stay with the breath, stay with the body breathing. And if we wander off, to notice that and then come back again to the body breathing. So setting that intention now, reminding yourself of that intention now. And now in the first stage of the mindfulness of breathing, we add the count after the out breath. So breathing in, breathing out, 1. We say that quietly, internally. Breathing in, breathing out, 2. And so on at your own pace. And when you reach 10, start again at 1. But the aim is to be focused on the breath, not to get through any number of counts. Letting the breath be relaxed, but being aware of the breath in the body. And if you wander off, just coming back again to the breath and starting the count again from 1. And now moving into the second stage, making sure we're still in touch with the breath in the body, not an idea. So feeling the body breathing. And in this stage, we add the count before the in-breath. 1, breathe in, breathe out. 2, breathe in, breathe out. 3, breathe in, breathe out. And so on when we reach 10, starting again at 1. And trying to relax the breath if we find we get tight or controlling. Relaxing into the breath. And if you find you've wandered off, that's okay. Just noticing that, acknowledging it, that you've wandered off, but now you've come back to awareness. And bringing your awareness back then to the body and the breath and the count before the in-breath, starting again at 1. And again, noticing if we've wandered off and coming back again to the practice. And now in the third stage, we drop the count. We're simply aware of the breath. Each breath in, each breath out. We can also be aware of things like, where does the in-breath become the out-breath? Where does the out-breath become the in-breath? Being quite interested in the breath, being curious about the breath. So we've nothing else to do, nowhere else to be, just here with this in-breath, just here with this out-breath. Can we enjoy the simplicity of just being here with the breath, letting go of everything else? And now in the fourth stage, spend a few moments noticing, firstly, where we can first feel the breath enter the body. So noticing that point. Trying not to force the breath here, if you can, but spending a bit of time noticing. And now as we breathe in and as we breathe out, noticing how it feels, noticing the sensations at that point. For example, how the in-breath feels, how the out-breath feels, and how they feel different. And if we wander off, that's okay. Just coming back again to the practice, back to the body, breathing, back to the point of first contact, and the sensations there. And now letting go of the breath, letting go of the practice completely, letting go of all effort. We're just going to just sit, remaining in posture with your eyes closed, just sitting, letting the mind do whatever it wants to do as we absorb the meditation we've just had. And spending a few moments now investigating your mental states. So doing that in a very relaxed and open way. So how are you feeling right now? What kind of states of mind are you in after having done the practice? Not getting conceptual. Really, you're just opening up to what is going on, allowing yourself to experience that, bringing it into awareness. And noticing too any sense of energy or joy or calm or concentration or equanimity in your experience right now. Are you less likely or more likely to be blown around by the winds now compared to an hour ago or a couple before you started the course tonight after having done this meditation? And when you're ready, then bringing the practice to a close, opening your eyes, taking in the room around you. Okay. So I hope you found that of benefit. So I'm reluctant to move too quickly into the next thing, but I think we're under a little bit of time pressure. Hopefully you're okay there. So that's a taste of meditation. And it's a very good way of, it's kind of harder to explain why it counters the worldly winds, but it just does. So a lot of your home practice this week will just be meditating. So let me share the home practice this week and then we'll go into groups. So firstly, read chapter 3 of the book. So that is the chapter all about these bojjhangas, the 9 factors of enlightenment, or the 7 factors of enlightenment. Continue to work with the worldly winds in the way that we talked about on previous weeks. Continue to pay attention to the Dharma doors and all that kind of thing. So that's like you could say that that's working off the cushion using what we learned. But I want you to meditate every day if you can. And if you have an established meditation practice, you already know what to do. You can do the mindfulness of breathing, the development of loving kindness, which is another meditation that we do. But if you're new to it, either do the body scan or the mindfulness of breathing each day. So I'd recommend one each day. And I'll send you links in the email and in Slack for the guided meditations, where you can just press play on your phone or on your computer and you'll be guided through them. And the body scan is 20 minutes and the mindfulness of breathing is about 25 minutes in total. So yeah, really encourage you to do that. You really have to make an effort to get meditation in every day. Yeah. And I'd really encourage you to do that. You can talk about it a bit in the groups now in a moment. Easiest to do it, I think, first thing in the morning, or if you really need to have a cup of tea first, after your cup of tea. But if your day is really busy or you've got kids, you might need to work out, who get up early. You might need to do it in the evening when they're gone to bed. It's up to you, but at least try and do it every day. But if you did like 3 or 4 or 5 times a week this week, I'd be reasonably happy. Yeah. And also then let us know, let everyone know, let us know how you get on. Let us know on Slack how you're getting on. The conversations are starting to happen a bit more on Slack. It's really nice to read how people are doing. And it's just us as well, you know what I mean? So it's really nice to see you there. So do come to Slack. And if you can, give a donation as well, yeah? So what we'll do now is, let me just share that home practice in the chat. And then when we're ready, Stephen's going to send us into groups for 10 minutes. And then my camera's gone unblurred. We'll go into the groups for 10 minutes and then we'll see if there's any questions when we come back. So Stephen, you can stick us in our groups then when you're ready. I think we're all in. So that's it really for tonight. I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions that you have, but your home practice is to do the meditation, work with the worldly winds and so on, read the book. And we'll see you next week. So next week, we're going to look at Buddhist wisdom. So bringing the kind of cutting edge of wisdom to the worldly winds and looking at probably a bit more kind of the stories and things like that, but just having a wisdom perspective on the worldly winds in order to free ourselves from being caught up in them. So we'll see you next week, and I'll email you the video and all the resources, and I'll email you the guided meditations as well shortly too. So we'll see you next week. And if you want to stay on, if you have any questions, you can do so now.